There is a number that does not get talked about enough: 140. That is the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit that the interior of a sealed vehicle can reach on a 95-degree summer afternoon. Not in Death Valley, not in the middle of the Sahara, in a parking lot, in Phoenix, in Houston, in Atlanta, in Detroit, and for the roughly 272,000 Americans who live in their vehicles on any given night, that number is not a weather statistic. It is a countdown. Let's start with something that most people do not fully understand, because most people have the luxury of not needing to. Heat inside a vehicle is not the same as heat outside a vehicle. When you step out of your car after leaving it in a parking lot for 2 hours on a hot July afternoon and the steering wheel burns your hand, that is not just inconvenience. That is physics doing something genuinely dangerous. A vehicle is essentially a greenhouse. Sunlight passes through the glass, it heats up every surface inside. Those surfaces radiate heat back into the air. The air has nowhere to go. The temperature rises, and it does not stop rising just because you are inside it. On a 90-degree day, the interior of a parked car with the windows up can reach 130 degrees Fahrenheit in under 20 minutes. In under an hour, it can climb past 150. Steel walls hold heat differently than insulated walls. They absorb it, store it, and radiate it back long after the sun goes down. Van dwellers call this thermal mass, and during the winter, it is a gift. During the summer, it is something else entirely. The human body starts to struggle when the core temperature rises above 104 degrees Fahrenheit. At that point, the brain begins to malfunction. Confusion sets in. Coordination disappears. Sweating, which is the body's primary cooling mechanism, starts to fail when the air around you is already hotter than your skin. At 107 degrees core temperature, organs begin to shut down. Heat stroke kills faster than most people realize, and it kills quietly. People do not usually scream. They get confused, then tired, then they stop moving. Between 2023 and 2024, heat-related deaths in the United States rose by nearly 50%. The people most at risk were not hikers who got lost on a trail. They were people sleeping in places without air conditioning, people sleeping in cars, people sleeping in vans. Now here's what the news coverage of those deaths almost never tells you. The people living in those vehicles often knew things, techniques, strategies, systems built out of desperation and refined over weeks and months of trial and error. Because when you cannot afford a solution, you engineer one. And some of those engineering solutions are so effective that they would genuinely surprise you. These are 7 of them. Way number 1, strategic parking, the free skill that changes everything. If you ask someone who has never lived in a vehicle how they would stay cool without a C, most of them will immediately start talking about fans or cooling towels or some gadget they saw on Amazon. And that is because most people think about the problem from inside the van. Experienced van dwellers think about it from the outside. Specifically, they think about where the van is before the heat ever gets inside. Strategic parking is not complicated in theory. In practice, it is closer to an art form. Shade is the obvious starting point, but experienced van dwellers are not just looking for any shade. They are reading shade the way a sailor reads wind. They are looking at the angle of the sun at 8 in the morning, calculating where the shadow of that building will fall by 2 in the afternoon, and positioning the van inside that shadow window before anyone else gets there. A spot that is shaded at noon but sitting in direct sun by 3 in the afternoon is not a cool spot. It is a slow oven with a delayed timer. The orientation of the van matters just as much as the shade. Metal heats fastest on the surfaces that face the sun directly. That means the side of the van facing west in the afternoon is absorbing the most heat during the hottest part of the day. Experienced van dwellers park with the nose or the tail facing the afternoon sun, minimizing the surface area of the vehicle that takes direct heat. A van pointed east to west in a parking lot is a solar panel. The same van pointed north to south catches a fraction of that radiation. Wind corridors are the third piece of this puzzle, and they are the piece most people never think about. Buildings create wind shadows on their downwind side, but they also create compression zones on their upwind side where air moves faster. Narrow passages between buildings accelerate airflow significantly. A van parked at the opening of an alley between 2 large buildings on a day with even a light breeze will sit in a stream of moving air that makes a 20-degree difference compared to a van parked in the middle of an open lot with no obstruction. 20 degrees in a van in August is the difference between uncomfortable and dangerous. Trees matter too, but not all trees equally. A large deciduous tree, something like an oak or a maple with a wide canopy, blocks solar radiation and also releases moisture through its leaves in a process called transpiration that actually cools the air directly beneath it. Veteran van dwellers know which parking lots have the old trees and which have the ornamental saplings that do essentially nothing except look nice to the property developers who planted them. None of this costs $1. All of it requires paying attention. And for people whose lives depend on getting it right, that attention becomes second nature. Way number 2, the wet towel system. This one sounds so simple that your first instinct is going to be to dismiss it. Do not do that. Human beings have been using evaporative cooling to survive heat for roughly 10,000 years. Before refrigeration, before electricity, before someone invented a machine that moved heat from one place to another and plugged it into a wall. The principle is the same one your body uses when it sweats. Liquid evaporates. Evaporation absorbs heat from whatever surface it is leaving. That surface gets cooler. Inside a van in summer, the wet towel system is one of the most effective zero-cost tools available, and experienced van dwellers have refined it far beyond just draping a wet cloth over their forehead and hoping for the best. Here's how it actually works at the level that makes a real difference. The first thing van dwellers learn is that fabric matters. A thin cotton towel or a piece of old cotton t-shirt retains water and releases it slowly through evaporation. Thicker fabric holds more water but releases it too slowly to do much cooling work. Thin, loosely woven cotton is the sweet spot. It holds enough moisture to keep evaporating for an extended period without being so saturated that it just drips and makes everything wet. And before you ask, yes, there is a wrong way to do the wet towel thing. A soaking wet towel pressed against your neck is colder for about 90 seconds, and then it is just a wet towel. A damp towel placed across the back of the neck, the wrists, and the inner ankle, where the major blood vessels run close to the skin's surface and allowed to evaporate slowly, actively pulls heat out of the blood moving through those vessels. You are not just cooling your skin, you are cooling the blood that is circulating through your entire body. The second refinement that van dwellers use is location. Windows cracked just slightly create a draft that dramatically accelerates evaporation from any wet surface inside the van. Hanging a damp towel in front of a cracked window so that incoming air passes through it before reaching the interior is essentially a handmade swamp cooler. The air picks up moisture from the towel as it passes through. Moisture evaporates. Heat is absorbed from the air. The air that reaches the interior of the van is measurably cooler than the air outside the window. This is not a made-up trick. This is the operating principle behind evaporative cooling systems that people in dry climates install in their homes and pay real money for. A wet towel and a cracked window is the $0 version. The third thing experienced van dwellers know is timing. The wet towel system works significantly better in low humidity than in high humidity because humid air is already carrying a lot of moisture and cannot absorb as much more. In Phoenix in July, a wet towel in a cracked window is remarkably effective. In New Orleans in August, where the air is already so saturated with moisture that you feel like you are being slowly consumed by the atmosphere itself, the evaporative approach works less well and other strategies become more important. Knowing which tool works in which conditions is the kind of knowledge that does not come from a YouTube video. It comes from sleeping in a van in summer and paying very close attention. Way number 3, ventilation architecture, making the van breathe. Hot air rises. This is not a metaphor. It is a physical property of warm air that van dwellers exploit with methodical precision. A sealed van in summer heat is a closed system. The air inside heats up, rises, and has nowhere to go. The result is a convection loop that keeps cycling the same hot air around the same hot interior until the temperature equalizes with the hottest parts of the van's metal structure. To break that cycle, you need to give the hot air somewhere to escape, and you need to give cooler air somewhere to enter. This is ventilation architecture, and in the van dwelling community, people have figured out how to build it from materials most people throw away. The basic principle is cross ventilation. Open something at the bottom on one side of the van where cooler air can enter. Open something at the top on the opposite side where hot air can escape. Hot air rises and exits the high opening. Cooler air is drawn in through the low opening to replace it. If there is any exterior breeze at all, this process accelerates dramatically. Without any breeze, it still works because the temperature differential between the air inside and the air outside creates its own pressure gradient. The problem with vans is that cracked windows create security concerns, and fully open windows are not realistic for most people sleeping in parking lots at night. So van dwellers have developed improvised solutions. One of the most common is the window scoop. A window scoop is a simple deflector mounted in a cracked window that redirects passing air inward and downward into the van's interior. Commercial versions exist, but the free version is made from a cut plastic bottle, a piece of cardboard shaped and folded into an L shape, or a segment of pool noodle split lengthwise and wedged into a window frame to hold the window open a specific amount while blocking visibility from the outside. The geometry of the scoop is the important part. Angled correctly, it catches even a slight breeze and funnels it into the van. Angled wrong, it does nothing. The roof vent is the other critical piece. Vans with factory roof vents are significantly easier to cool than vans without them. But even without a factory vent, van dwellers have found solutions. A black trash bag with small holes cut near the top, secured loosely over a rear window that is cracked at the top, creates a solar chimney effect on sunny days. The black surface absorbs heat, warming the air trapped inside the bag, which rises and pulls hot air from the van's interior through the window gap below it. It looks bizarre. It works remarkably well. Nobody said van dwelling was glamorous. One woman in Portland, who had been living in a Ford Econoline for nearly 2 years, described building a ventilation system entirely from cardboard, tape, and the plastic housing from a broken box fan. The motor was dead, but the blade still spun. She mounted it in a rear window frame with cardboard supports and let the natural airflow from the van's cross ventilation spin the blade passively, which broke up stagnant air in the interior and accelerated the convection loop. She said it dropped the interior temperature by nearly 15 degrees on a still day. A retired engineer heard her describe this setup at a church meal program and told her it was essentially the same principle used in passive ventilation towers in medieval Persian architecture. She said she did not know anything about Persian architecture, she just knew it worked. Way number 4, the reflective barrier system. Before a van can be cooled, it has to stop absorbing heat. And right now, if you walked up to a van sitting in the summer sun, you would find that the single largest source of heat entering that vehicle is not the metal walls. It is the glass. Glass is transparent to solar radiation. Sunlight passes through it and hits the interior surfaces, which absorb the energy and convert it to heat. The metal walls of the van are actually somewhat reflective. The windows are not. They are essentially holes in the van's thermal envelope through which the sun pours directly onto your seats, your bedding, your water bottles, and everything else inside. This is why the steering wheel burns your hand and the seat scalds the back of your legs when you get into a car that has been sitting in the sun. The solution is a reflective barrier, and the materials that van dwellers use to build one for free are so basic it almost seems like a joke. Emergency mylar blankets, standard aluminum foil, the reflective windshield shades that people buy at auto parts stores and then leave in their garage. These materials reflect the vast majority of incoming solar radiation back out through the glass before it can be absorbed by interior surfaces. They do not just slow the heat buildup, they nearly stop it. Emergency mylar blankets are the gold standard for this application because they are extremely lightweight, fold down to essentially nothing, reflect upward of 90% of radiant heat, and are free at the right places. Hospitals and emergency rooms hand them out routinely. Disaster relief organizations keep them stacked by the case. Marathon finish lines distribute them by the thousands. Food banks and warming centers often have them. A person who spends 2 or 3 afternoons visiting the right locations in a city can easily accumulate enough emergency blankets to cover every window in a full-size van. The installation method matters. A mylar blanket simply laid across the dashboard does some work. A mylar blanket cut and shaped to fit the window precisely, secured with binder clips or strips of hook and loop tape to the window frame so that there is no gap around the edges, does dramatically more. Every gap is a place where sunlight gets through. The goal is a complete seal of reflective material across every window surface on the side of the van facing the sun. The transformation is immediate and dramatic. A van with properly fitted reflective barriers on the windshield and side windows on a hot summer afternoon will be 15 to 25 degrees cooler inside than an identical van without them. Not marginally cooler, not slightly more comfortable. 25 degrees cooler, that is the difference between a difficult situation and a dangerous one. Way number 5, the buried bottle cooler. This one requires a small amount of setup and almost no money. The physics behind it are nearly prehistoric, and the van-dwelling community has quietly rediscovered them out of pure necessity. The ground, specifically the earth below the surface, stays at a remarkably stable temperature year-round. A few feet down, the soil temperature in most of the continental United States hovers somewhere between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of what is happening on the surface above it. This is why root cellars worked for centuries before refrigeration. It is why caves feel cool in summer and warm in winter. The Earth is a massive thermal battery, and it almost never gets fully hot or fully cold all the way through. Van dwellers who have access to even a small patch of dirt, and in parks, along roadsides, and in vacant lots, patches of dirt are actually remarkably common, have learned to exploit this. The method is straightforward. You take plastic bottles, fill them with water, dig a hole roughly 12 to 18 inches deep, pack the bottles into the hole, cover them with soil, and leave them for several hours. When you pull the bottles out, the water inside has been cooled to somewhere near the Earth's ambient subsurface temperature, 55 to 60 degrees. You now have a supply of genuinely cold water without a refrigerator, without electricity, and without spending anything. This is not icy cold water. It is not going to feel like something out of a vending machine, but it is cold enough to drink on a hot day and feel the immediate physiological effect of cooler fluid entering your body. It is cold enough to press against the pulse points on your wrists and the sides of your neck and feel genuine relief. And it is cold enough, in the context of everything else on this list, to matter. Some van dwellers take this a step further by wrapping the cooled bottles in the same wet towel discussed earlier, placing them near the cracked windows they have set up for cross-ventilation. The bottles act as a cold mass that chills the air passing over them before that air enters the living space. Improvised air conditioning, genuinely free. The kind of solution that makes engineers wince slightly because it works and it has no business working as well as it does. Way number 6, thermal mass sleeping. Storing cold like a battery. If the Earth stores cool the way a battery stores charge, the interior air of a van at 3 in the morning can do the same thing. And experienced van dwellers have built entire nighttime routines around exploiting that window. Here's what happens to temperature inside a van over the course of a summer day. In the early morning, around 4 or 5, the interior temperature is at its lowest. The van has been sitting in relatively cool night air for hours. The metal walls, which absorbed heat all day, have slowly released it through the night. By 5 in the morning, the inside of the van is often within a few degrees of the outside air temperature, which in many cities during summer still means somewhere in the high 60s to low 70s. That is genuinely comfortable sleeping temperature. Then the sun comes up and the thermal clock starts again. What experienced van dwellers do is treat that early morning cool air as a resource to be captured and preserved as long as possible. Every window and vent that was open through the night for cross-ventilation gets closed before the outside temperature rises above the interior temperature. The van essentially becomes a thermos. The cool air trapped inside loses temperature slowly, much more slowly than the exterior heats up, because the van's metal walls now work in your favor. They are slow to heat from the outside, just as they were slow to cool from the inside the night before. A van that was completely sealed at 5:30 in the morning with cool night air trapped inside and reflective barriers on every window facing the sun can maintain a livable interior temperature until mid-morning, sometimes later, buying 3 to 4 additional hours of comfort that would otherwise be lost. The sleeping schedule that emerges from this logic looks strange from the outside. Van dwellers who have optimized for heat often sleep from roughly 9 at night until 4 or 5 in the morning, staying awake or active during the worst heat of the afternoon inside air-conditioned public spaces, and then returning to the van in the evening as it begins to cool down. This is not sleeping rough. This is thermodynamic scheduling, and it is one of the most sophisticated adaptations in the entire catalog of van-dwelling survival strategies. Way number 7, community cooling networks. Every single strategy on this list so far has involved something a person does alone, inside their van, with their own body and their own ingenuity. And those strategies matter. They keep people alive. But the seventh way is different because it requires understanding that no one survives extreme heat entirely alone if they have any choice in the matter. In cities across the United States, there is an invisible infrastructure of cool that most house people never think about. Libraries, churches with open doors, fast food restaurants with unlimited free water refills and nobody checking how long you have been sitting in the booth. Laundromats, which are air-conditioned by necessity, because the machines generate heat that has to be countered. Community centers, hospital lobbies, museum atriums, grocery stores, cooling centers that open specifically during heat emergencies and are listed on city websites that almost nobody outside the unhoused community regularly checks. Experienced van dwellers do not just know these places exist, they map them. They know which library opens at 9 and which one does not open until 10. They know which McDonald's has a manager who will let you sit for 3 hours with one coffee and which one will ask you to leave after 45 minutes. They know which churches leave their side doors unlocked on weekdays and which community centers have water fountains right inside the front door without requiring you to walk past a reception desk. This mapping is shared. It travels the same way that Tamara's container building techniques traveled through rural Mississippi, through food pantry lines and church dinner tables and casual conversations outside the Plasma Donation Center on a Tuesday afternoon. A woman in Phoenix described how the cooling network knowledge in her community was passed person to person with the specificity of a local guide. Not just which library, but which section of the library had the best air conditioning, which exits were closest to free street parking, and which security guards would give you a quiet nod and which ones would not. In Seattle, during the heat dome of 2021 that killed hundreds of people across the Pacific Northwest, community organizations scrambled to open cooling centers. The people who survived in vehicles were disproportionately the ones already connected to the informal networks that told them where those centers were before the city had finished updating its website. Community is not a soft concept in the context of extreme heat. It is a survival mechanism. In Nashville, a group of van dwellers organized a WhatsApp group they called the Cool List, a shared running document of every air-conditioned location in the city where they had confirmed they could sit without being asked to leave. It covered 37 locations across the city. People added notes. The Family Dollar on Dickerson Pike has a broken cooler by the door that blows extra cold. The main branch library on Church Street lets you stay until closing without issue if you have a bag that looks like you are doing research. This is the kind of hyper-local institutional knowledge that does not appear on any government list or nonprofit website. It exists because people who needed it built it themselves and then shared it, because that is what humans do when the system does not have what they need. There is something that happens to a person who spends a summer managing heat inside a vehicle with no money and no mechanical assistance, something that people who have done it describe in similar ways regardless of where they were or how they got there. You get very quiet about your body. You stop ignoring the signals it sends. You learn the difference between uncomfortable and dangerous, and you learn to read that difference early before it becomes a crisis. You develop a relationship with the time of day, with the direction of the wind, with the specific angle of afternoon light that most people in air-conditioned rooms never develop because they never have to. There are roughly 272,000 people sleeping in vehicles in America tonight. Some of them are running out of ideas. Some of them already know every single thing on this list and have refined it further in ways that would genuinely impress you. Some of them are sleeping right now in a van with emergency blankets on every window, a wet towel on their wrist, bottles cooling in the earth outside, and a mental map of every library within 5 miles. Not because they read it somewhere, because they figured it out. One brutal summer night at a time. The 7 strategies in this video did not come from a survival manual. They came from the people who needed them. And the least we can do is make sure those people know their ingenuity is being seen. If this video meant something to you, hit subscribe. Every week, we cover the stories of people solving impossible problems with whatever they have in their hands. The video on screen right now follows a family who turned a condemned structure into a permanent home with less than $400 in borrowed tools. Click it. You will want to see how it ends.